this level, which is the minimum. I'm gonna do it here in purple. This is where you need to reach. You need to at least achieve this concentration right here, whatever that is on this side. It really depends on the infection and the type of bacterial infection, but this is where you need to reach, this level right here. Anything lower than that doesn't do anything. Anything higher than that, yes, it will kill off the bacteria. So these are things that you keep in mind. You gotta keep in mind, and this is how you're gonna be using it. So moving on. This is the showing you basically. This is a simulated profile. This is the high dose versus conventional dosing for aminoglycosides. So high dose meaning that you give one dose and it reaches this concentration at once. This is a really high dose. It's a really high dose. So when you give the dose, it reaches this 20, let's say 20 milligrams per liter, which is just an example, but let's say that this is the high dose. And then as time goes on, this is in hours, see how it's gonna go down, and eventually it's gonna go down to 0 over days. And when you think, or when you give the traditional dosing or conventional dosing here, what you do is you give one dose, a lower dose, but one dose, and the concentration goes up in the body, and then it goes down gradually. Give a second dose, goes up, and then it goes down in the body. After a few hours, give another dose, goes up, it goes down in the body. So this is the conventional traditional dosing, and this is the high dose iterative dosing, which means that basically you give a dose every so often or every so many hours, let's say every 24 hours. And there are formulas that you can calculate how often or how frequent you need to give these doses. It depends on a lot of different factors when you look at the pharmacokinetics of the medication. So you can actually calculate that. But this is something that we need to go over. So we have the time dependence. What is the time dependence? We have the time dependence here. We have some of the time dependent antibiotics. We have to talk about them. It is the beta-lactams, things like vancomycin, linezolid, and erythromycin. They're all time dependent. Sometimes they're mixed. Vancomycin, we'll get to that, but it's not necessarily just time dependent, but it's more like mixed. So we have the killing activity dependent on the concentration, obviously, and how long it remains above the MIC. So you want to stay here. You want to stay here all the time. You give one dose, goes down, but you want to give another dose, goes down, and dose. Or the infusion, like if you give an infusion in the hospital, and this is the concentration you want to keep it at. You give the dose. I'm gonna do it with red. So you give the dose and then infuse the dose over so many hours, let's say 2 days, 3 days, 10 days, whatever. But you want to keep it here. So basically you continue here, infusing it over time. That's what you want. So we have the dosing strategy. We have to maximize the time above the MIC, like we said. So you want to keep it at least 50% of the time above this MIC. And then also obviously it's going to vary depending on the drug, depending on the bug meaning the infection, the type of bacteria. And then there are going to be combinations sometimes that you need to use. It's not just one type, but there's going to be multiple combinations. So the data suggests when host defense mechanisms are absent, you need at least 4 times the MIC. and that might be a better number. So if, let's say, your body doesn't have the ability to produce any defense against these infections, then you need 4 times that the MIC concentration to be effective, to be efficacious against this infection. Okay, so we're down to slide number 7, and we'll be talking about optimization of time above MIC with continuous infusion. This is the continuous infusion I was talking about. See, you do 1 dose interval dosing, but in this case you optimize the time above the MIC, because when you do what we call a bolus dose, this bolus dose, it'll give you this high concentration, but it will eventually, like you can see, it will go down here. But when you do continuous infusion, you can see this is the MIC right here. So you give it as an IV infusion, and then you infuse it over time. It keeps on, you keep it on, and you keep it here continuously. And so you maximize or optimize the time above this MIC with continuous infusion, and that's the goal. Remember, you got to keep it above the MIC at least 50% of the time or more. In this case, it's almost 100% of the time if you exclude this infusion period in which it reaches concentration or MIC. And then you continue on. Alright, so next slide. Drugs where continuous infusion is not necessarily or not possible. Then we have these drugs. We have with a long half-life. This is a half-life. Basically, that's what this is a T for time, and then half-life. How much the half-life, basically, you guys know, but it is how long does it take for the medication to drop by 50%. So how long, when you reach in concentration, let's say this is the MIC, and then you reach this, let's say this is 200 milligrams per deciliter, but then that's a little over the MIC, so that's is a goal. How long does it take to drop by 50%? That's basically what the half-life is. So 200 is going to go down to 100. Let's say the 100 is right here below the MIC. How long does it take? Well, it depends. Each medication has its own half-life. They're not all the same. Some might be 1 hour, some might be 5 hours, some might be 20 hours. So it really depends. So when if the time is greater than the MIC, tends to be maximized when targeted against appropriate pathogens, ceftriaxone, metronidazole. But then sometimes it can't be done because it's not possible, or it's not very efficient to do it that way. But I just want to make sure that I mentioned that I want to make sure that everybody knows what this is. This is the time that it takes for a medication to drop by 50% from a concentration down to half, basically. How long does it take? And then the next thing is unstable drugs. Some of the medications are not stable, so you cannot necessarily give this continuous infusion. To give you an example, imipenem, meropenem, ampicillin. And so these are very unstable medications, so you cannot use them in continuous infusion of this, so they'll not be viable medications when you try to use them or mix them in an IV bag and give them as a continuous infusion. They don't last. So for example, ampicillin, I think it only lasts about 4, if I'm not mistaken, 4.5 hours. About 4 hours, let's say. And if you need to give an infusion that's going to be for 12 hours, obviously that's a problem. You can only give it for 4 hours or less than 4 hours before it goes bad. So that's one example. But yeah, So we're gonna be talking about the post-antibiotic effect, PAE, and some of the names. I'll give you an example. This is defined as the persistent suppression of bacterial growth after a brief exposure, 1 to 2 hours, of bacteria to antibiotic, even in the absence of host defense mechanisms. So if you give a dose, and then if the dose obviously is going to stay in the body, but if it stays in the body and the bacteria gets exposed to the concentration of this antibiotic for at least 1 or 2 hours or longer than that, there's going to be an effect which is called the post-antibiotic effect, and not all antibiotics will have that effect. As you can see, some of them have more of an effect, some don't have an effect, like penicillin have a little bit of an effect. Aminoglycosides has this triple plus right here, which means that it's gonna be a post-antibiotic effect greater than that of something like penicillin. And so you have some of the gram-negative organisms like the antibiotics that will affect this gram-negative bacteria like aminoglycosides, quinolones, carbapenems, tetracyclines, penicillins, cephalosporins. So you have the gram-negative and gram-positive organisms like some of the infections, but then they get affected by aminoglycosides, penicillins, cephalosporins, erythromycin, linezolid, quinolones, tetracycline, and clindamycin. So this is the PAE effect, and some of the organisms broadly categorized in this gram-negative or gram-positive or negative families or types. Okay, so this is the last slide that I'm going to be talking about this time, and then I'll pause it right here. So this is the Staph aureus and the Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and you can see here's the Staph aureus and the concentration here on the left, and then you have the time, you have the control, and then these are the specific antibiotics: ciprofloxacin, imipenem, ticarcillin, and how they measure that. So the control was up, and after hours you can see that ticarcillin is this one, and then you have imipenem here, you have imipenem, and then you have ciprofloxacin here in the squares. And this is for Staphylococcus aureus, and this is for Pseudomonas aeruginosa. You can see that the control does not change by much, and this is the same dilution, 10 to the negative third, 10 to the negative third. You can see that the greater effect is with the Staph aureus, with some of these antibiotics. Like if you compare this ticarcillin here on this side to that side, you see that this is a greater effect than that on this side. This is greater because it's lower. The concentration of bacteria is lower on this side than this, which is almost like the control. And then if you actually look, almost all of them, because if you check this, if you look at this one right here, it's below this mark. You see how this is a little bit above the mark. Same here, this is a little bit above the mark, and this is a little bit almost at the same level. So you can see the effect. This is a greater effect in Staph aureus than that of the antibiotics against Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Anyway, I'm going to stop it here. This is all I want to show you today. Thanks for checking out this semi-lecture, and I will be back to you and talk about this in the next episode. Thank you.